at about 45 minutes of content with William and Julie speaking. Please do ask questions throughout the webinar by using the question button. You can type in the questions, we'll then respond to you, and we'll do a series and selection of questions at the end. Hopefully we can get to all that are asked. We'll leave about 15 minutes of that, so we will finish within an hour. I'd also now like to extend the really warmest of welcomes to our two speakers. William Tincup from Tincup & Company. He's a guru on user adoption, and he's going to be taking us through and killing some of the myths around HL software implementation. And then we'll hear from Julie Lecomte, who is the Senior Strategic Advisor on Change Management from Bombardier, which is a global transportation company based in Canada. She's going to take us through their recent implementation, which was rolled out globally on HL software, their successful approach to user adoption, and some of the lessons that have been learned through that. And as I said, please do type in your questions in the question box as we go through, and then we'll put it to William and Julie at the end. I'd like to now hand over to William to start us off.
Absolutely. Ronnie, thank you so much for the warm introduction, and even though I absolutely have a lot of disdain for the word guru, I do appreciate kind of where it comes from. So a little bit of me died right then, but that's okay. That's all right. We're gonna make it work, I promise. So the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to start off with some of the myths around adoption. And some of these are going to be a little bit stronger than others, but we all kind of inherit myths. So let's talk a little bit about user interface and user experience, both of which are vastly important. Intuitive, easy to use. It's kind of, if you think of the gamification, Googleization, Facebookization of software, consumer software in particular, and how that has kind of moved over to B2B HR software. We need software that ultimately kind of mimics the consumer world in some ways. We want it to be easy. The problem and the myth, however, is that if software is just easy, then we don't have to do the things around change, training, and communication to drive user adoption, because somehow mystically, because the software is easy to use, users will just use it. And what I would argue is that let's not make this a beauty contest. You know, let's actually get to what really is important in your organization is, does the software work? It's got to work. It's got to align with corporate strategy, a strategy. The software has to work. I'd go so far as to say, and be bold to say, that user experience and interface are actually not as important as the software working and or getting people to use the software. So I prioritize the product working, and I prioritize people using it over UI and UX. So the third thing on the list is software vendors are organized to sell software. Shocking, right? Newsflash. They're organized to sell software, and that's fantastic. Not as many of the software providers are great post-sale. So one of the things I would argue is, you might have fallen in love with software. It might be really intuitive. You've fallen in love with the vendor, but now the analysis needs to be, okay, I'm going to sign the contract. How do we conjure up user adoption together? What do we do post-sale? I mean, implementations. You want to get HR in a fetal position. Say the word implementation, and that'll happen. So what I would say is that there's great consulting firms out there that we can work with. Some vendors, again, are better at implementation than others, but understand that the landscape that we live in, software firms are in the business to sell software, and that's okay. The features and functionality is an arms race, and it's okay, but what I would tell you, a couple years we were in the UI arms race. Everyone was just trying to make their software really sexy looking, which is great. Then came social. Is your software, is your HR, is your performance management application, is it social enough? Is your learning application, is it social enough? So it's the you know, the crossing the worlds of the great HR software and the social space. Can we, you know, how can we make it more social? What I would say is just an arms race. And then currently the world we live in is there's an arms race around mobile. And mobile is important. I believe that. But I believe you have to look down at your corporate strategy, your HR strategy, your user population to find out if any of those things are as important as the vendors make them. So vendor's job is to make those things, kind of bring those to the top of the list. Great. Your job as an HR pro is to then evaluate, is that in alignment with our corporate strategy, HR strategy, and or the users that we have. One of the things that we have in user adoption is you got kind of doubles tennis thing. The vendors think that we're great at communicating to our employees, and we think that they're great, and that if we pick the right software, that all of a sudden magically user adoption will happen. And that's a fail on two levels. HR is great at communicating some things. Let's say benefits enrollment, wellness initiatives, etc. We are great at some things. However, we are not necessarily great at communicating software change. We don't have enough muscle memory, we don't do it frequently enough, etc. So one of the things I would say is that we need help on the communication layer so that where they know the software, we know our audience, we do need to work together to get communication to the appropriate intended audience. Second to last is picking the game of selection. It's my estimation that 80% of our time in HR is picking the right, and I'm using air quotes, but you can't see them, the right software. I believe that actually that the fail is that 20% of our time should be in picking the right software, and 80% of our time should be in manipulating, conjuring, orchestrating user adoption. Getting people to use the software, in my humble opinion, more important than picking, quote unquote, picking the right application. But if you were to go and poll HR leaders, most of them spend a lot of time selecting the tool and not enough time actually getting people to use the tools that they invest in on a daily basis. Lastly is about ROI. Most of the ROI calculations that are out there assume 100% adoption and or use. So there's kind of a fail there. We kind of lie in ROI. And the lie is because we assume too much adoption. And so we either need to discount the ROI or we need to put in place things that will actually garner user adoption. Final thought for here, and then this is really when you're thinking about purchasing HR software, I really want you to think this thought. Carve it in stone, tattoo it on your heart, whatever. A feature is not a feature unless users use said feature. So here's the deal. In the sales process, it's all jazz hands, nothing personal. We're going to show you a lot of things, get you really excited about this something or another. At the end of the day, if your users don't use it, it doesn't matter what that feature was. So if it really is important, then you've got to make sure that you convey that to your user population. You get them to use the application. So let's talk a little bit about change. Yeah, change is hard, right? Shocking, news at 11. But here's the thing. Underneath the surface of your organization are tributaries of anxieties. That just is. I don't care if you have 2 people or 200,000. There are tributaries of anxiety underneath the surface, just like water. One of the things is you need to know what those anxieties are. You need to unearth what those anxieties are, and you need to unearth who has those anxieties. The what is important so that you can start to treat it. And the who is so that you can select those folks and target them and get them to have less anxiety with this change. So secondly, I want you to think about onboarding in a different way as it relates to software. How can we make that moment special? How can we make that moment when they're all of a sudden, the first time they're in the software, magic happens, pixie dust? How can we make that onboarding event special to them? Thirdly, whatever the old way was, status quo, spreadsheets, stone tablets, whatever, there was an old way, and now we need to get them excited about the new way. Whatever that new way is, it's a game and change of how do we make them excited about that new way. The fourth bullet point is about, you know, the old way and new way, if you did. Like if you think of it like this, yesterday you ran that report, the outcome that was important. You clicked 4 things, you went into this area, then you ran the report. In the new way, you're going to go click 1 time and the reports will be on the right-hand side. So it's understanding the underpinnings of how people use software currently and how they'll use it in the future. The adoption curve, basically the one that I have in front of you today, is a very simplistic, rudimentary adoption curve where we just carve people out and say, you're an early adopter, you're on pace with your adoption, or you're a laggard. We need to know who these people are in our organization. Who are our early adopters? Who's more comfortable? But who are of?
Oh, sorry, William, we lost you for a second there.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. We were just
Okay.
we just lost you around laggards.
Okay, so the game of partnering early adopters with laggards is a way to get the laggards up to on pace. And the game with on pace is to get them there quicker. Like we know that 30 to 60 days you're going to be able to adapt this technology. We want you to do it in 31 days. So with on pace, we want to quicken their comfort level in the software. The last bullet point on this slide, if you really want to drive user adoption with HR software, add it to their job description and add it to their performance review. So an example, we're rolling out a new ATS. We have 100 corporate recruiters. Talk with them and say, we care so much about our investment with this technology. We're going to add this to the usage of this application to your job description. We're also going to add it to your performance review. We're going to train the heck out of you. We're going to certify you in the technology. And ultimately, 6 months later, we're going to grade you on it. We're going to compensate you as such. So if you really want to drive adoption, add it to their job description, add it to performance review, train the heck out of them, and shockingly enough, they'll use the software. The last part here is we need to really think about the moment that people use the software for the first time, and we want to orchestrate that feeling. Now let's talk a little bit about communications. Communications all start and end with alignment and simplicity. What is your overall corporate strategy? What are your corporate values, the limits of the product, and how are they in alignment with your change and training strategy? Having an alignment with all of those things is critical. Next is looking at your audience. And your audience is everyone inside the box, board, executives, VPs, international managers, line managers, department managers, frontline employees, every part-time, full-time, cut that any way you want, but it's all of the people inside the box. And then I want you to think about the who, what, when, where, and why. How do we communicate change? How do we communicate this new software? How do we communicate what's important to them? I want you to build awareness and interest for the software. So I want them to become aware. No one gets blindsided. We have a rule, no surprises. And I want them to be interested because what you're really toward the lever is have to versus want to. I'm trying to move the lever between you have to work with the software to want to use the software. Okay? I want you to communicate in a relentless manner. I mean relentless as any way that you want to define that relentless. And lastly, I want you to think about the first year of the rollout, 30, 60, 90, 120, 180, all the way out to a year. Most software rollouts fail because we lose energy. We get distracted, we're focused on other things, and the first 30 days is fantastic, 45 days is a little bit less fantastic, 60 days we're on to something else. And shockingly enough, we look down 6 months, 9 months later, and people aren't using the software for its intended use for value. Shocking. So the last thought I have here is that I want you to visualize change, communication, and training as the 3 legs to the stool that is user adoption. Now let's talk a little bit about training. Think about what is important for you to teach and what's important for them to learn. So what's important for you to teach is the outcome, the report, the thingamabob. What's important for them to learn is how do they log in on their iPad in Budapest. Okay, so understanding those two worlds and bringing them together. Second biggest failure in user adoption is learning styles, not understanding how people want to learn. So assessing, surveying, figuring out, and then putting content in front of that audience in the way that they will consume it. So let's take an example. I'm a video person. I want to learn your software because I want to see a Camtasia video. I want to see a video that explains it, and then I want to go and then replicate it. You then offer up PDFs and white papers. Same content, different medium. I don't consume that. Thusly, I'm never really going to adopt the software. The fourth point is about global. If you have people in different countries, you have to put training in front of them around the software in their native language. Okay, English, got it, it's global language, totally understand it, but here's the deal. Same scenario as before. I like video, you offer up video training, fantastic. I'm in Brazil, native language Portuguese, so I want to consume your video, you offer it up in English, I don't consume the video. We failed. So if you're global, if you have employees across the globe, you have to think of not only their learning style, but culture appropriately, how do we offer up content that makes the most sense for them? Creating a user certification program looks like this. You can work with your vendor to create this, and ultimately what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a baseline for quality. Okay? You want to make sure that people really know how to use the software in your environment. So a simple user certification program will help you get to that quality level. Plan for succession looks like this. When you evaluate your software, your entire stack of software, there are critical roles inside your organization. Identifying those critical roles and in creating redundancy. So take payroll software. You have 4 payroll admins that are all in New Jersey, earthquake, hurricane, they're all offline for 6 weeks. How do you get payroll out? So something that simple, right? How do you identify the role and then put a training schema behind those folks where you create some redundancy? Hopefully you'll never have to use it. The last 2 points are really interrelated. It's another lever. Rewards and incentives work in your organization. I don't know what the ecosystem of your organization is. Hopefully you do. But there's something that works. To drive user adoption, use some incentives. Partner with your vendor, partner with a consulting firm, but use some incentives to then pull some of those levers to then ultimately get to the place where they adopt the technology. Okay? And that can both be on the usage of software, but also around how they share information around the software, etc. The final thought that I have here is that another fail is that we train people once and we hope that they get it, and we've moved on. And what I would argue is that one and done training just doesn't work. You have to train them relentlessly, and more to the point, you have to train them where they are. Meeting them where they are in whatever frequency that is and making sure that it's appropriate to them, relentless pursuit. So that's the slides I have today, and I'm really excited to hear from Julie because she's just rolled out a successful program. So with that, I will then turn the presentation over to Julie.
Thank you so much, William. So hi, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to share our experiences today. Perhaps so we can start this conversation, I'm going to give you a bit more information about our organization. So Bombardier is shaping the evolution of mobility. Every day around the globe, Bombardier manufactures state-of-the-art planes and trains that will help people, but also goods, get where they need to go. So we're truly a global transportation company. We're really all about finding ingenious solutions to modern-day problems. And we operate in 2 leading industries, so the aerospace business and the rail transportation. Going to move. So we have approximately 62,000 employees all around the world. They all design and manufacture and sell the wide range of product that we have in those two sectors. So we have commercial and business jet, as well as rail transportation equipment, services, and systems. So our company has 60 production and engineering sites in 23 countries, and we have customers in more than 100 countries around the world. So we truly think we're a global company in that sense. Our headquarters is in Montreal, Canada, and in the last fiscal year, in 2010, end of January, we posted revenue of $19.4 billion US. I think one important component of the project we've kicked off is its relation with our corporate strategy, which clarify our focus and our vision. It's truly our way forward. And it's our approach to obstacle, to leverage our ingenuity, and to transform any obstacle into opportunity when we face them. This strategic priority has 5 pillars that help us look forward. So those 5 different pillars look at customer satisfaction through execution. They look at managing the risk that we have in the organization and being proactive looking at them. They also encompass local roots, because we want to establish ourselves in the local markets we are developing. And also we're really focused on enhancing our corporate social responsibility. I've skipped the second priority, which is this raising our game on global talent management, which is really a key priority in terms of everything we do here around talent. It's ensuring that we become the employer of choice, investing in the development of our talent. And really, our goal is to attract, retain, but also develop the talent that we have. And we know that if we have the right talent in the right place, we can grow where we want to go and be in new market where we're not in there today. So it's all about raising our game to world-class standards. So that was the strategic vision of the organization, and I think we were very fortunate to have a priority on talent management, which supported us. So what did we do? We essentially looked over the last year at developing a clear roadmap, a wide company approach that would look at best practice. You see on the slide the Burson approach of the different talent management processes. And we truly structured that approach based on best practice, but also building on a global team with representative of all of our group in aerospace and transportation in our FlexJet organization. And our goal was to reach a common alignment on key talent management processes. With a better understanding of our need, this really has enabled us to select the right technology we needed to support the transformation we wanted to have. So in 2010, we decided to partner with SuccessFactors. And trust me, selecting the technology was quite the easy part of this process. Aligning all of the talent management different processes was really the cornerstone and much harder in our approach. So first, in 2010, we've tackled the succession planning process. We felt this was a contained processes in HR, and we wanted to structure it and streamline the governance around it and deploy a technology that would support that. So we deployed then the employee profile functionality to all our manager and up, so roughly 4,500 employees worldwide, with succession planning module from SuccessFactors. So that was our first project where we looked into that.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
Bombardier Competency Dictionary. As you see its placement into the process chart, it's really at the core of what we want to do in HR. So all of our group had their own competency dictionary, and through 2011 we've agreed to consolidate and looked at 21 that would be common for all of us and useful in all the group. And then that has been helping us to move to the next step in 2011, where we've simplified the performance management. And that was very, and also a very large project. What we wanted to do is simplify performance management as the standard annual process. But we also want all of the white-collar employee, which represent 35,000 employees worldwide, we wanted all of these people to have the same global online forum. So globally, we really started from different places. Our aerospace businesses, which represent 15,000 employees roughly, we're still using a paper version of the performance forum. Same for our FlexJet organization. Other groups like corporate head office and transportation we're working on different online tool. So what we decided to do is create with goal, performance, and career development module from SuccessFactors alignment to clarify what we're expecting on top of our employee and really introduce a formal process to ensure that we cascade down objectives from top to all level in our organization. And that's when also we have decided to extend the employee profile to all of the white-collar employee at the same time of deploying performance. So how have we approached that project from an HR standpoint? We really achieved the alignment by first looking at some guiding principle. And
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
The expectation and result and change we were putting forward. This has highly facilitated the discussion we had throughout the project. This was really helpful to support. Oops, Grace, are you still there?
I can hear you, Julie.
Okay. I just heard, just saw a chat for the...
Yeah, we're fine.
Okay, great. No problem. So really, those guiding principles really facilitate those discussions in the project, because what we wanted to do is global alignment, and we wanted to bring value with a lot of flexibility. So we wanted consistency, but again, we wanted to be sensible to any cultural differences that we had. We wanted to create something motivating for the employee and the manager. So that was also something we wanted to lay in and make sure that any decision we were taking were going to there. And more importantly, we wanted to simplify the performance process or any other talent management process, which, let's really face it, when you think it is simple, you can make it even simpler. So simplicity was something, a guideline for us that we would always go back and ask ourselves, if I'm outside the project, would it be simple enough? Would it make sense for somebody that's not working on the project right now? So these were our guiding principles. For the stakeholders, so outside HR, of course HR was a key stakeholder, but we've looked at some goal with any of the stakeholders that were involved. So we've looked at them and we defined a strategy and a vision for each of them to understand what was in it for them and where we want them to go in the future. For example, we aim for a manager, for a people manager, to become talent champion, and we wanted to lay what would be the different steps to get there so that they could raise the quality level of talent discussion they have with employee and also give them good coaching tool to do that. For our employee, we want them to be architect of their career. We want them to take ownership and tell us what they want in their career, showcase their experiences. And that's why in our deployment strategy, when we thought about HR goal, where we want them to be business partner and transform into talent partner, this is really why in the rollout of the project, we focused on first looking at the HR community. For a concrete example, for 3 to 4 weeks, we have focused on training only the HR community to let them time to adopt the tool, and that was just way before we looked at showing that to the employees. For the training strategy, which is another component, once we've done all the high-level vision by stakeholder, it was much easier to look at deploying and developing a good training strategy. So we needed to train a lot of employees, a massive number of employees that would be, spread all over the globe in different languages. We had 9 languages. We could have all the way up to 13. Currently, we have 13 in all our sites. So we decided to at least allow 9 languages, which represents the majority of our employees for now. We wanted to make sure that we train on several elements. So first, we wanted to train them on the context of the change, the strategy as for why we were changing them, so the way forward, raising our game on talent management and clarifying where this priority was coming from. We wanted to train them on the new process, so on new performance management, making sure that they understand why we're changing the process. And then we wanted to train them on the new application and the technology. And this is when we decided to partner with HaveLearn to help us. We've chosen to provide on-time based delivery training, which is structure on when you need to do performance management. So you need to have, a piece at objective setting early in the year, you go back at mid-year, and then you come back at year-end. So structure the training around, those phases helped us to reduce the length of the training, but also focus on what are the key messages when you actually need to do the process. And then finally, I think early on in the project, we clarify how we would succeed and how we would agree this worked out. So we clarified the metrics for employee adoption, and we evaluated how many users would complete their profile, their employee profile. Or we also assessed, how many percentage of performance management we wanted to get. So for objective setting, we wanted to reach 100%. So everybody moved on to the next step. One final thought, I think, is deploying training before your process actually kick off was something that we have done. So performance management in Bombardier start January 1st. And we've trained people starting in November and December so they can discover the tool without the pressure of actually going through their performance review. So I think that was something helpful for us in the training strategy. Now you're seeing on the screen the different presenter of the 9 languages we have. So this is a picture of our application, which we call vTalent, supported by SuccessFactors. You have the library on the right-hand screen. So this is a repository that is accessible within our application where our employee can access their training. So we have video in 9 different languages, as I mentioned. And our employee can choose a language in which they work, and then they have the associated video for their process. We have a curriculum, again, for an employee versus for a manager that is breaking down between the performance management step. And to give you more concrete examples, so we've just launched last October 1st, and after 3 months, we've reached out almost 17,000 views, which 71% of them were in English and 25% roughly in French, which are our 2 most predominant languages. So we found that this was an innovative way to train and really engage our employee, and we felt that with the number of views, we've proven that this worked for some employee, and the application was available. We also recognize that people don't learn at the same way, so these videos were really helpful and innovative, but at the same time, in our training strategy, we really wanted to be extensive and ensure that we are covering all the different learning styles. So we knew some of our employees would prefer to have standard written documentation, and this is really why we developed a series of guide and short pager internally to describe the process, provide quick tips, and the context of the change. This is also centralized in our application where any employee can find all of the resources applicable to them. So for us, having everything in one central location, since this was a global tool, was part of our strategy. So I think maybe in conclusion, I think there's a few things we've learned. Although I would say we're fairly early in deploying the process, I think we have for now user adoption, but the key tests will come. You know, we're going to close very shortly our objective setting phase, so that will be a key milestone. So when William was talking about post-project key milestone and thinking about training and communication again, we still have work that is coming up. But what we've learned is that linking your talent management project to a business strategy really makes it more successful. Also, ensuring that you have a global community. Bombardier is fairly decentralized as an organization. For us, building that community and starting the alignment well in advance of bringing a technology forward was really helpful. Clear accountability, guiding principle, ownership for making decisions. I think that's also something we've learned, that you need to really work hard to make those things happen. And implement, you know, at the moment where you strategically think it makes sense for your organization. We've chosen to introduce, you know, before the PMP process based on an experience we had. We've rolled out software at the same time of the process, and we've learned that this was not perhaps appropriate for us. So that's why we've selected. And every organization has their specificity, so that was something that worked for us. And I think my final thought is really with relation with your partner. No matter who you select, being Upland, being SuccessFactors, you need to really have a close relationship with them so that they clearly understand what you expect from them, but also how they can support you and you can help them make it a successful project for both. Because, you know, nobody wants to fail. Both organizations want to make it work. So that would be what we've learned in our experience so far.
Awesome, Julie. I've got a couple questions that come to mind as you speak. First of all, just thank you. That was absolutely fantastic. Knowing what you know now, okay. So now you've had a little bit of time, a little bit of reflection, and specifically regarding user adoption, what would you change about the rollout?
It's really it's a good question, and it's funny because we've done our postmortem just this morning, so there's fresh things coming to mind. I think something that really comes to mind is that our project timeline was really planned, and we planned that, for example, we had 9 languages, so we planned all translation activity would be realized during the summer shutdown. So we thought, you know what, like translation will be done by external translator, so it won't really pull on the global team resources. So we thought it was a good move. Unfortunately, knowing what we know today, I think we would do this differently. I think personally, for key user adoption, what is very important is that there is consistency and alignment throughout everything you do, meaning that if you call performance management processes in English, it needs to be called that way in all the documentation. So in your video, in your configuration, everywhere. So the quality check is really, really important so that you really are in alignment throughout. So that's something, the timing of translation and the expectation on what it would require, I think we would change that for sure.
Okay, good. Another quick question. How did you, when you first started, you had some type of definition of success. So when you first, you know, this was way back when, you sat around the table and you're like, what is success for the project when you started, and how would you define success now? Like what is that metric, or what do you look down and say, yeah, success is this?
Yeah. To give you an idea of the timeline, so for performance management, which was a project in itself in 2011, we kicked off end of January and we went live in October. So at the beginning, when we were kicking out early in the year, as the project lead, like my first metric was to ensure that all the different groups, aerospace, transportation, we would all agree on one global performance management process and one online form for everybody. So that was my first metrics. And we achieved that throughout re-engineering the process and doing the configuration. So that was metric number 1. now that the tool is live and deployed, the metrics is really linked to performance management itself. I gave you an example. So February 28 is the last day of objective setting in Bombardier. So we're aiming for 100% of form in our system to be moved, within the next 10 days or so, and making sure that people complete their processes on time. So that would require a lot of effort in the next few weeks. So that's going to be a metrics for me, and we are going to have another one at mid-year and at year-end. So those metrics of people using performance management and complete a review is going to be helping us to measure the success.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Could I just add a question to that from one of the listeners? So Daniel has just asked, and very aligned to what you were saying, Julie, that with performance reviews and goal setting typically done maybe once a year, how can you ensure user adoption without regular interaction with the software?
Yeah, exactly. And it's difficult because I'll compare it. We would compare it to your tax. You do that yearly, and then when you go back, sometimes you don't remember exactly what were the rules. So that's really why we've created the videos. So the tutorial were less than 5 minutes. They're available, and there is one for objective setting, one for mid-year, and one for year-end. So what we invite people to do is to go back to see their video just before they need to do the process. So that's really what we think, and the video covers, how you go in the system, where you click, but also the context and how you have a conversation on competency as a manager, for example. So it's really a quick refresher that we hope employee can go back. So we will measure that much better through mid-year, because of course as the launch of the project was just now, we've done more extensive training and face-to-face training to ensure we have good adoption of the tool.
That's fantastic. Let me ask a question. Y'all are really proactive. I mean, a lot of folks kind of deal with an implementation, a rollout, and then a year later they're left with an application that they're not getting what they feel the value out of, etc. Your firm was proactive in orchestrating user adoption. Like, why is that? Where did that vision come from?
I think Bombardier is an innovative company that is flexible. One of the core competency we have is flexibility. So adapting to change is really part of our DNA as an organization. You really need to have that. But it's also an organization, Bombardier is sensitive to cultural differences. So we've grown over the year with several acquisitions and vertical integration. So we think globally and try to act locally. So I think this is why we're sensitive to the local practices, and we think ahead of user adoption. So we want to make sure people can adapt and have locally all the room for implementing in their different sites. So I think we have those strategies in advance, but at the same time we ensure there's authority for deployment at the appropriate level in the organization where it makes most sense, So there's no large leadership from a corporate standpoint, and the leadership teams in our site, these are the people who make those changes happen, and we really rely on them for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Julie. One question that we have as well that's come through, which is, you've planned everything right from the start, but what happens in terms of people who've already implemented their HR software? And do you think, this to William and Julie, how easy it is to backward engineer user adoption?
I'll take a swipe at it because it also mirrors a question that Daniel's put forth. I think ultimately, if you've inherited a situation where you're either you moved into a new job, all the systems were in place, or a year later, 2 years later, you're sitting there in a 5-year contract, and when you get right down to it, people aren't using the software. I don't suggest the switch. I don't suggest just blowing things up and starting over. I think, however, you do need to reset everything with the user population. Like, I get it. We've got so-and-so tool for, 3 years. We're not using it. Okay. And then go backwards in time and say, what are we going to do from a communications, from a training, from a change perspective, and garner user adoption. Again, now we've got to go backwards and create excitement for something that's already there. It can be done. It's hard. But I would tell you, it's hard to get adoption out of new tools as well. So adoption is not easy. That's also why a lot of people just don't do a great job at it. But I think there is life for applications that aren't being used. I think it takes we have to accept it. We have to look at each other and say, yep, there it is. Now let's go reset expectations. Let's kind of reset everything. And then if that doesn't work, then then I think you switch a change to a new tool. It's just like in sports. Sometimes that you have to change the coach because the team just stopped listening to them, etc. Let's do everything that we can with the applications that we've already invested in. Let's try and get the value out of those applications. But if we can't change the application, that would be my 2 cents. Julie, what do you think?
I think you're totally right. I think it's possible after a change. You just have to think about the same step we discussed today, strategically assess the situation and think how we can position things for the future. So deploying training and communication according to that message. So I think it's possible, but it's just a matter of laying out those different components that will make everything you do part of something that makes sense for a user. There's a connection. They see a reason for the change, and they can better buy into it.
Lovely. We've got lots of questions flying in, so we'll try and whiz through as many as we can in the next 5 minutes. Charlie asked, to what extent should the user group, particularly if this is a broader employee base, be involved in the selection, design and implementation phases? Does involving them help with user adoption on the back end, or just make things more complicated on the front end?
No, well, I mean, it's for sure it's not simple to involve. You involve more people, you get more opinions. So that would be my first reaction to that. And I think you need to have the right balance of the different view. For our project, we wanted to have a global view, so we decided to pick different, representative from an HR standpoint. There's different initiatives where we use focus group to go and gather feedback. So these forums are usually useful. I think the downside is sort of to manage expectation to these forums, because when you engage employee in providing feedback, you owe them an answer afterwards, or you owe them to manage expectation with regards to providing their input, because if we value their input, it means that we can redirect the project or redirect the scope. So I'm really, we would do forum. We didn't do that for the performance, but I think it's a great idea. We just need to be, I think, careful about managing the expectation.
Yeah, I think Julie nailed it, Ronnie. The only thing I would add is that early adopters, if you can identify the early adopters of technology, in particular software technology, trying to get their views, because they're going to be your internal champions and internal advocates, and possibly some of the people that you're going to then help, but they're going to help you with your rollout. But it's Julie nailed it. It's all about managing expectations. We want to bring them into the process as much as possible. And I like the firms that kind of go and get the short list done. Like they've already done the corporate strategy, HR strategy. They've got it down to needs analysis. They've got their budget. They go out to the ecosystem. They find 3 partners that the products work. They fit inside their technology stack. And then they bring in some of that feedback. Like there's an appropriate timing for me as well.
Perfect. There's another couple of questions that have come in particularly to William, about your point of making a user's first time special and magical, and what would that look like? And that's from Kim and Tim, who both asked the same question.
Sure, a lot of it is just not blindsiding them. So, I mean, the irony of ironies is they have pretty low expectations, because typically technology change just kind of is the book to the head for most employees. I think letting them know that this is happening, that it's going to be fantastic, that you have a training schema, and that you're going to make sure, because what really is going on is no matter how crappy that old software was, they were confident and competent in that old way. So easing all of that by saying, no, we understand change is hard, we're going to take care of you, we're going to train you, and guess what? When you see the new software and all of its power and its alignment with our corporate strategy and values, you are going to love it. So it's getting them excited, which, oh, by the way, isn't hard because the current environment is we just hit them over the head. Like they walk in on Tuesday, it's like, hey, by the way, got a brand new system to learn. And so I don't think it's that difficult. We just need to think about it.
Great. There's a question for Julie here from Abigail. Did you tailor your training for different users, or did you use the same format for all audiences, and was this successful?
We had two different audiences, and it was mainly around it being an employee for the performance versus being a manager. And by a manager, we tailored it between like people manager as a whole, so meaning you're a director, you know, a vice president, it will all be in the same category. What we did, I think, so these were the two different, so we would have a different message for employee versus manager. And I think we tailored the length. So we had some sort of executive two-pager, which people really like, so it stands on just one page, both sides. This really worked well with our manager because they want to know in a very brief fashion what do they need to do, and they don't want to go through a 30 pages presentation. The more lengthy, for example, the presentation to employee, they want to have more time, they have questions. So that material, so having a face-to-face or longer training presentation work well because they often have more questions and want to understand deeper. So I would say that's how we've tried to adapt to the different audiences.
Fantastic. One question that's specific about the videos. What was the average length of each training video that you used?
So roughly 5 to 6 minutes duration total. So that's what we aim for. In the languages, so in translation, I mean, some of them were a little bit longer due to languages, for example. Speaking in certain languages takes more time, have more words, so duration can go up to 7 minutes, for example, or a bit more. But that's what we aim to.
Great. And another question for you just on the training materials. This is from Kim asking how many of the training materials were developed internally by your team versus ready-made by the vendor, and what was the interaction between the two?
Pretty much most of the material was developed internally. Of course, we've looked at what was provided by the vendor, and they have great materials. So everything was inspired with their approach. But we found that the key message and the context was so important that it was probably easier to develop them internally. But we've used the same principle of the vendor with, you know, short two-pager and the similar approach. But we found that it was just easier to do them internally and to use the global community to build the content because, you know, it serves you two purposes. It brings you different point of view, but you get buy-in at the same time on your content if you have the different representative from your team participating to build the content.
That's great, and a very broad question really to end, and I think it's something that we've covered, but just to reiterate it, how do you measure user adoption? William, do you want to take that to begin with?
Sure. I think you have to look at the application, like in, you know, for instance, to performance reviews. I think you would look at user adoption and you would say quality inputs, on-time delivery. And that's how you would look at adoption. If you were to look at like an ATS or something like that, a recruiting solution, you would look at hours. You would look at time served in the applicant tracking solution. So I think you're going to look at it from an organization. You're going to cut this by saying what's important to the organization, to the business, to the HR strategy, and you're going to create some metrics that make sense inside that application.
Great.
I totally agree with you, William. I think this sums up what we are trying to do. And measuring, I think, is important. If you want to make sure you can assess if the change worked out, you need to define upfront how you'll measure it. So it's a key component.
Excellent, and I think we'll go for a final question from Joe that's just come in, which was to Julie, really, and it's a question that says, where did you get the biggest pushback from users, and how did you overcome it?
I don't think from user or employee we got pushback. Of course, I mean, it's a new tool. People have day-to-day jobs, so this adds up. I think we have some sort of comments in terms of workload depending on what's going on in each of the different teams. You know, if I would deploy performance management, but we're in the middle of year-end for a finance team, of course I'm going to receive a little bit of pushback because of the timing of when I introduce a change in that team, which is not optimal. But let's face it, as a global process, it's really difficult to find the perfect window where there's a workload that is acceptable throughout the corporation for people to absorb the change. So I think the biggest pushback is to be sensitive to workload in those teams and to really try to adapt and make sure that you understand their priority and you find a way around to make them adopt the change, you know, timely, but also understanding that they might not be as early adopter because of other priority in their groups.
That's fantastic and a really thoughtful note to end on. We'll call it to a close now, and just to let everybody know that we will send out a recording of the webinar to everybody that registered. So check your inbox and you'll get a recording through of this so you can share it throughout your organization. There has been some Twitter conversations going on during this, and if you want to add anything, the hashtag is #useradoption. I'd just like to take the chance to say thank you very much to both William and to Julie for making time to do this webinar, and thank you all for joining. All the best.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you very much, Ronnie.
All right. Bye now.